You're attracted to this because you're hurting. You're attracted to this ideology, and the ideology tells you you're a warrior for your people, whoever your people are.
The problem with suicidal thoughts is how intense they are. It feels like they will never end. And when you're in that, you have this kind of tunnel vision. It feels like it's going to last forever.
Majority of people look at a homeless person. They're a drug addict. They made bad choices. If homelessness was a punishment for bad choices, we'd all be homeless.
The women that are struggling, that gives the blowjob at $5, this for me is pure 100% exploitation.
I stabbed my wife 3 times one night because she wouldn't let me finish my bottle of vodka. Still not thinking I had a drink problem.
Ultimately, 1 in 2 Americans will experience family estrangement. So that's 50% of the population.
To be completely honest with you, I am a refugee, but I'm not just a refugee.
Because I am George. I'm not George with Down syndrome or Down's George, because that's not me.
Welcome to Purposeful Empathy, a show that is dedicated to amplifying the voices of people from across the globe who understand the world needs more empathy and are doing something about it. This season will inspire you to empathize with people who are regularly marginalized and misunderstood. You won't want to miss a single episode, so hit the subscribe button now. Thanks for watching and enjoy the show.
We're built with this internal alarm system that's telling you something's not right here. And in a society that teaches us to be, as women, to be polite, to not rock the boat, to be respectful, all those kinds of things, don't make someone else feel uncomfortable. And to learn how to be like, yeah, that's all garbage. When this alarm system's going off, I need to trust it, period. Even if trying to explain it to someone else, they might be like, what do you mean? He just unplugged the phone. Nope. My alarm system said no, and I'm just going to go with that. And if I'm like maybe overreacting, which chances are you're probably not, but even if maybe I am, I still kept myself safe. And that's really important. And that whole system was shut down in me. And that's why I say, like, it ended up with me being in situations that I never should have been in. So it's really important, I think, especially for women who've been abused, to learn how to, listen to yourself. Yeah. We're built this way, and it's really, and for a purpose, and it is for our safety. But when you've been abused and assaulted in various ways, it can totally break that down.
Welcome to a new episode of Purposeful Empathy. Today I'm joined by Amanda Carrasco, a family survivor of both homicide and sexual assault, who has courageously transformed her personal experiences into a force for community change. She recounts her story in her first book, Becoming the Brave One, a courageous memoir that traces her journey through unimaginable pain toward healing, justice, and self-empowerment. At the heart of Amanda's work is a deep commitment to breaking cycles of harm and building restorative pathways forward for individuals and communities impacted by the justice system. And with 4 master's degrees spanning law, business, leadership, and public policy earned in Canada, the US, and the UK, she brings a truly global perspective to her advocacy work. Amanda's also an adventurer at heart, with one goal left to reach: surfing every continent, with the exception of Antarctica, I believe, because it's a little cold. This season, I'm shining a spotlight on people who often feel marginalized or misunderstood. And through each conversation, my goal is to better understand different lived experiences in order for us to widen our circle of empathy. Given her journey as a survivor and her unwavering commitment to justice and community healing, I've invited Amanda to share her insights on breaking cycles of harm and how restorative justice can transform lives. Welcome so much to the show, Amanda.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
And congratulations on your book. When is the publication date?
August 26th. So for all of the listeners and watchers, it should already be out and available for purchase.
Great. So we'll have links in the show notes for anybody who's already intrigued or by the end of this conversation ready to pick up a copy. Amanda, you believe that trauma leaves deep scars, but they don't have to dictate futures. Your life story, I think, is a testament to the human spirit's capacity to overcome. I wonder what you would like to share with us about your past traumas that might provide context for the rest of our conversation.
Sure. So, I mean, as you mentioned in the bio, I am a family survivor of homicide. I was living with my sister, her husband, and their children. And my brother-in-law decided he didn't want to be married anymore or a father, and so he had planned to kill all of us. Um, I had had a fight with my sister that night, and so I actually was staying at someone else's home. So that's why I'm here today. The oldest child also survived, but my sister and the twin boys are no longer with us. At various times and capacity, I was also sexually assaulted by family members and non-family members. So there's been a lot of things that I have experienced through that time, which, certainly have had deep impact and shaped, who I am today.
I am so sorry for your loss. That sounds horrific. What do you think you've learned about, I guess, men in this case, who reach that place? I mean, I imagine, did he survive? Did he kill himself in the end, or did okay. What
No,
happened?
he tried to get away with it. He tried to pretend it wasn't him, that, there was a random stranger that came in and attacked them basically. So he's incarcerated in Canada. He's been incarcerated, for 30 years now. It went to trial and I had to testify as I was trying to graduate high school. I was testifying in a murder trial at the loss of my family, and he was convicted and, sentenced to life for attempted homicide and the three homicides. So he's in jail. He is now eligible for parole, and we've had several parole hearings, and I've been attending those hearings. He's a person that I don't believe has changed, even though I believe people are capable of change. I've seen it, and I'm so grateful to have had the experience to be able to meet people who have completely transformed their lives, including people who have committed homicide. Unfortunately, my former brother-in-law is not one of those people. I do not believe that he is safe to the community, but I still hold out hope that maybe one day he would choose to be accountable and take full responsibility for what he did and do the work that needs to be done to deal with how you get to that point that you would choose to commit those kinds of horrendous acts.
Did you ever see signs that he could be possible, that would be possible for him?
I didn't. I was 16, and I didn't see it. I know now there were things that she sheltered me from that were going on in the home. There were only like a couple of you know little things that I saw that were very minor. And so, when I woke up the next day, and it was actually my biological dad who called me at my friend's house because someone had called him and said, they pulled a woman's body out of Susan's house. There was a fire. You know, is it your daughter? Because I lived there. So my dad was trying to track me down to see if it was me. And so I woke up and, learned about this loss. And my friend and I drove over there, and, there's police, there's, fire and everything. And it was shock, to kind of be like, what is happening right now? And, later that afternoon, the police took me for an interview, which I don't have any memory from the time that we got to the house until being in the interrogation room. I'd have no memory. It's a gap there. But I remember being in the interrogation room because you're trying to piece together, what is happening, what has happened. Like I just, it's so huge at that point to try to figure out like what is happening. And so it was during the interrogation where I was by myself with the police officer and a stenographer, and he's asking me different questions, and I finally pieced together that this wasn't an accident. And so that was a thing in and of itself. He had to stop the interview. They left me alone in the room because I was in hysterics. And they just like left me. And because I couldn't understand that anyone would do this on purpose. So once I had wrapped my head around the fact that someone actually did this on purpose, there was definitely no way that I thought it was him. And obviously he wasn't incarcerated right away. He wasn't arrested right away. There wasn't this immediate proof kind of a thing, right? It takes time for them to gather evidence, build a case. So while they were doing that, we were trying to, piece life together as much as we could at that point, have the funeral, go through all of those types of things. And then it was, several months later that he was finally arrested. And even when he was arrested, I used to go to the police station and write notes to him saying, we're going to get you out. This is going to be okay. I don't know what's going on, but they'll find the guy. They have to find the guy. They'll find the guy, every week. And it was then through the whole sort of trial process and like pre-trials that different things started to not make sense. Different pieces of evidence started to come out. And I'd be like, but that's not the Dean I know. Like he wouldn't do something like that, except he did. And so there was just piece upon piece. And so between the pre-trial, which I testified at, and I remember like waving at him, and kind of trying to be encouraging, to the trial, it was in between there that I finally put it all together and went, oh my God, it was him, and realized that the man that I loved didn't really exist in the context that I thought he did. And he was absolutely capable and did, in fact, murder our family. So by the time the trial came, I knew it was him. And I wanted him dead, that's all I could think of when I was testifying. And I would watch him be brought to and from the courthouse each day. And I just thought, like, you deserve to die, because like you should never have done that. Like that's horrific.
So I'm
Yeah.
imagining that there's shock to the system, like total trauma. And then there's grief. And then there's rage. And then there's guilt, survivor's guilt. I'm imagining that you went through all of those, and maybe not in the order in which I shared them. How was it to live through that experience? And what would you want to say to your younger self in hindsight, or anybody else that might be listening or watching that has gone through something somewhat like what you've been through?
I honestly think that I don't know that I would say anything to myself. I think I would say things to the adults around me. Everyone was in shock, in fairness. Everyone was in shock, but I was 16, like I was still a child when all this happened. And you have all these adults that are trying to like process it and deal with it, but I'm a child. And I was very much left alone. So that whole scene that I described with the police officer, and like there's no support, and then I'm left in hysterics, basically being just told that, they were murdered, like this was intentional, and I'm alone. And so I think that I would say to the adults around me, like, hey, can you help her? Like, can you not leave her alone, please? This is really important because I just went numb. Like that's kind of how I dealt with it because I didn't know how to deal with it. So I just went numb. I went into a routine of like staying up as late as I possibly could because I didn't want to close my eyes. And I actually would watch the movie with Brandon Lee, The Crow, just on repeat. Like I would put it in the VHS player, this is how far back we go. Put in the VHS tape and I would just watch it. And if I didn't fall asleep before it ended, I would rewind it and watch it again. And I would sleep on the couch. I didn't sleep in a bed. And, like it just kind of went through this zombie-like state for quite some time. And showed up physically, went to school, did classes. I did graduate. But being a zombie is the best way that I can describe it because I just wasn't feeling really anything, and going through emotions, but kind of hollow, kind of not there. And then you get to a point where you're just kind of used to that and you just kind of bury things and carry on with life and don't really deal with it. Which is super unhealthy, but I didn't know any other way. I didn't know what else to do. So I did the best I could in those circumstances, but I needed help that I didn't receive, unfortunately.
And how about your nephew, I guess it would be the survivor. How was he and how is he?
Yeah. So, I mean, we've all been through a lot of things, right? It's a lot to carry. Dean was not his biological father, but he was the father that he knew. He was still very young, but even at 3, like that loss is still a tremendous loss. So I think that, he could certainly speak to his pain more than I could, but I would just definitely say that, we were all carrying pain.
Yeah.
And we ended up, kind of separated a little bit more because I had to go back, with my biological family, and he went to a different family. And so there was a little bit of connection for a time. And then I moved away to go to school. I moved out of our small town, which was a great, actually, a really good thing for me. But, it was harder to stay in contact. We didn't have the Instagram, socials, and, texting capabilities that we do now. But we reconnected, a little bit later and had become like really, really close. So I think we've all done the best that we could have given the circumstances. So I'll definitely say that. And I'll also say I'm really proud of him. I love him with my whole entire heart. There's a bonding that happens. And that will never change, no matter what. Like that's always going to be there. And I'm really proud of who he's become.
Mm. And then we layer on, which is just hard for me to imagine, that you're also the survivor of sexual assault.
Right.
Could you add a little bit of information to that, and then we know your history to have the rest of the conversation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the murder is certainly like a large and significant component. I would say the biggest one, but it kind of is sandwiched actually. There were a couple of family members that, to varying degrees assaulted me prior to that, like when I was much younger. And then afterwards, I was assaulted by another guy that I knew through like the area in high school. He was a little bit older, but I was still in high school. And then once as a young adult, by a guy that I was seeing, like he wasn't my boyfriend per se, but it was not a stranger assault. I'll say that. And one thing that I see a lot too is it's a lot of trauma, but I see connections between things. And I want to be very careful to not victim blame in any way. But I can see that people who have traumatic backgrounds, and I do talk about this a little bit in the book too, about ways that we don't listen to, our internal alarm systems, about ways that it impacts our decision making. So maybe we're hanging out with people that are less safe, and making decisions that can increase our risk levels. It's never our fault, but I can see how some of these things have impacted and influenced how I ended up being assaulted multiple times. So a lot of it is actually kind of interwoven and interconnected in an interior kind of way.
And so maybe part of your motivation in writing the book and sharing that is so that you nudge people who may have other victim stories to trust their internal system. I imagine that that's important for you as a message to get out.
Yeah, I've seen that. Like I've seen the difference in myself. Like I remember, and I can't remember exactly how much detail I put in the book, but I do remember a situation when I was young and there was an adult man and I was at his house. My dad was living in their basement suite and he had, run to the store or something and left me with him, which is fine. Like he was a trusted family friend, would have been no concerns. But he came and like sat beside me on the couch and put his hand on my leg. And I was young, like I was maybe 11 years old or something like that, and he's married with children, kind of a thing, 100% completely, totally inappropriate. And I remember feeling off about it, but I also was feeling like, well, no, he's the adult in charge and I need to listen and I don't, and so there was this like internal conflict. And I didn't, I didn't do anything about it. I didn't say anything to anyone. I never told anyone, that happened. I didn't tell my dad when he came back or anything because I just was like, this is the adult. You listen, you do what they're told, and at that point I had been already assaulted, by an uncle, by another family member, and so it's like, nope, you don't say things, you don't talk. And to have to learn over again, it's like learning to walk, like putting myself in situations, safe situations, but even just, going on like first dates and things like that. And then really, talking to my close circle of friends that I really trust and going, okay, can we break this down? Like, can we debrief after? Here's what I felt with this. Here's what this person did. And just having that affirmation. Some of it's little things. Like I remember going on a first date with a guy, and he got into my car and he just instantly like unplugged my phone and plugged in his phone. And I had already programmed in the GPS to where we were going to go because I didn't know how to get there. And I was like, oh, and I said, well, can you hold my phone and, can you direct us on the GPS? Because like I kind of needed that. And I didn't know what to, and I was like, this doesn't feel right. But it was just unplugging the phone, like, and again, I'm back into that struggle between listening to myself and what's telling me something's not okay here and just minimizing it and being like, it's not a big deal. I just unplugged the phone. And so that night I went home and I called who is now my business partner, Chris. He's one of the most emotionally empathic people I've ever met. He's incredible. He'll call me and I'll be like, hi. And he'll be like, what's wrong? And I'm like, dude, I just said hi. And he's like, I know, but I can hear it in your voice. And I'm like, oh my God. So he's incredible. And I called him and I said, this is what happened. It feels weird. He goes, oh no, Amanda. He's like, that is 100% not okay. Giant red flag. You're right on, and then he, unpacks exactly why that's a huge red flag. Do not ever go out with that man again, And I was like, oh my God, I was right, And so having those experiences and then trusting myself, it was like learning to walk again and knowing that, we're built with this internal alarm system that's telling you something's not right here. And in a society that teaches us to be, as women, to be polite, to not rock the boat, to be respectful, all those kinds of things, don't make someone else feel uncomfortable. And to learn how to be like, yeah, that's all garbage, like when this alarm system's going off, I need to trust it, period. Even if trying to explain it to someone else, they might be like, what do you mean? He just unplugged the phone. Nope. My alarm system said no, and I'm just going to go with that. And if I'm like maybe overreacting, which chances are you're probably not, but even if maybe I am, I still kept myself safe. And that's really important. And that whole system was shut down in me. And that's why I say like it ended up with me being in situations that I never should have been in. So it's really important, I think, especially for women who've been abused to learn how to, listen to yourself.
Yeah.
We're built this way and it's really, and for a purpose, and it is for our safety. But when you've been abused and assaulted in various ways, it can totally break that down. So that's important. Thanks for bringing that up.
And I read on your website, we'll also include that in the show notes. You've got a bunch of blogs on one page. One of them is called Do You Have Shelter? And you write about having read the sentence, no one is coming to save you, you have to save yourself. And you actually acknowledged that you thought that was a harsh way of seeing things, but you've come to realize that it's actually accurate. You've already alluded to the fact that when you were in the police station, for example, they left you alone. Nobody was there to comfort you. And, when I asked the question, what would you say to your younger self? You would say, no, I actually want to talk to the adults in the room and say, if a child has gone through something traumatic, it's your job to be supportive and there for them. So I just wonder if you could speak to this idea of no one's coming to save you. You have to save yourself, so that it doesn't sound so harsh.
Yeah, and it's hard because I do believe that to be true because at the end of the day, no one can do the hard work, especially like your internal work. No one can do that for you. Therapists are there to like help and guide you, but like they can't actually do it. You're the one that's in your mind every day. You're the one that has these, sort of toxic belief patterns that are in your brain that need to be worked through. So you have to do that work. No one's coming to save you. No one's coming to fix that. You have to do that work. And just as I gave that example about, going on the dates and stuff, like I was doing those things, putting myself in places to try to experiment with this and explore it, probably explore is a better word, and then coming back though to my community. So I think that community is really important. I think it's fundamental, but you have to balance that with the fact that they can't do the work for you. They can help you. Like I say, like the same thing with the therapist, right? They can guide, they can give feedback, they can do all those things. So they are vitally important. But at the end of the day, it's you that looks in the mirror. It's you that goes to sleep at night or doesn't sleep at night, and battles with those things. And I think that's important that we know that we have to do that. So there is an element where we do have to save ourselves. You shouldn't be, completely alone. That's not the way that we were built, but there's an element to it that we do have to do the work.
So I wonder, there's a lot that is out in the public sphere now around trauma-informed practices that help, sort of somatic work that can help release a lot of PTSD or other forms of stress. I wonder if you could share, because there might be somebody listening who might not be aware that what they're experiencing might actually be as a result of something that they experienced earlier in their life. So, what are some of the ways your trauma showed up in maladaptive behaviors or dysfunction or physical things? And what was the work? Okay, you've talked about the work that you have found helpful for you on your journey.
Oh my gosh, it's so, so true that there's things that we just don't even know or don't even see. So, I mean, I've been to different therapists, different things, different times. Some have definitely been helpful. There's also not great therapists. I'm just going to say that, so it's important that, you don't just sort of carte blanche jump in and be like, every therapist is a good therapist or every therapist is the right therapist for me, because neither of those are true. So, I've definitely had some great help along the way. And I ultimately got to a place where I kind of knew exactly that. I knew there was still some things. I'd worked on some things with self-esteem. I got into a place where I could look in the mirror and be like, okay, she's pretty, and I couldn't do that before, like when I was in my early 20s, I would look in a mirror and I would pick myself apart. She's too fat, her nose is too big, or whatever it is, like I would pick myself apart. Um, I didn't look in the mirror and think positively about myself. I didn't feel positively about myself. I felt like I was stupid and I was ugly and not really worth anything, to be honest. So, it was kind of like, it was almost like I'm lucky to be here because I don't deserve to be here, and again, that's sort of coupled with all of the abuse, all of the things that I experienced. So I did do a lot of work on some of those things and I had made some good progress, but I knew there was still kind of something, but I couldn't put my name on it. And so I went to an EMDR therapist. I had not heard of EMDR before. So this was something new. And I had a friend who's a first responder. And so, of course, a lot of first responders go to EMDR therapy. And, through her experiences and her sharing with me, I thought, that could be something useful. Like, let's try that. So I went to the therapist and explained to her, why I was there, that I felt like there was something else. And so we walked through this, and that was when we uncovered the survivor's guilt that I didn't really recognize, and it was a belief that I felt like I deserved to die. I didn't deserve to be here. I should have died. It should have been me, not her. If anything, at the very least, it should have been all of us together. And so, I still kind of carried that. And I'll say, like, some of these things I still carry in certain ways. Some are heavier than others. Some of them I've done more work on. And so, like when something happens and you try on a dress at a store and it's like too tight and you're like, you're fat, and it's like, no, actually, no, the dress doesn't fit me. That's all, and so some of those are sort of easier to combat, but they'll still come at you. It's not like it never goes away ever forever. It's just easier to combat it and be like, no, hella no. I've worked on my body. I'm really happy with my body. I really like it. So shut up, But some of the other ones, especially that one, it's a little newer. And so, but I see it in my behaviors. I see it in my decisions, and when my decisions were not really aligning up with who I knew myself to be, it was like, okay, why is there this disconnect? Why do I feel these things? And I've noticed now, living close to a woman who has stepped into the mother role for me, and constantly feeling afraid she's not going to love me anymore, like, if I don't say something or if I do something wrong or whatever. And so I'm working on that one right now because I'm seeing it in my behaviors. I'm seeing it in my thought process with her and being so afraid. Is she going to stop loving me? Is she going to, drop me, or, that kind of a thing? Because I didn't feel loved unconditionally as a child, and children should be loved unconditionally. They're children, like that's the thing. So that wasn't something that I experienced. And now that I have someone that I look to as a mom, I'm so afraid, and I feel like I have to earn that love.
Mm.
So I'm seeing it in my thought patterns, the biggest thing, but then your thought patterns, whether they're conscious or unconscious, they're going to come out in your behaviors. So you'll see it in what you're doing. You're going to see what you believe about yourself and about others in your behaviors. And then you can dial that back and go, where is this coming from? Why did I think that? Like I sent a message to my friend and I was like, oh, I don't want to be a bother. And is this okay? And I was like, oh, you're afraid you're taking up too much space. No, you're okay. And then I was like, wait, I overthought that. I'm just coming up right now, so yeah, it's in your thought processes and in your behaviors that you'll see those things and
Mm.
then be able to unpack it almost backwards, if you will.
Mm. Mm. And as you're talking, I'm completely understanding why Gabor Mate, I know you write about his work on your blog and you're a fan of his work, as I understand from just chatting with you before I hit record. You wrote another blog called Normalized Grief, where you say Gabor Mate is a trauma therapist. I resonate with his description of trauma and how it is not the event itself that is the most damaging and causes trauma. It is the being alone in the event. So we heard that earlier. Again, I just have this visual of the police officers leaving you as you're having the meltdown. That is why community matters. And you also mentioned community earlier, saying like, okay, we got to do the work, but community matters. Okay, let's talk a little bit about community, because again, there's going to be people who are listening, who are watching, who haven't reached for community or haven't realized that they could offer community. So why is that so important?
I mean, we're built for community. I fundamentally believe that, that is literally how we're built. It doesn't mean you have to have, 50 people, that's too much, but you definitely need at least an inner core circle, and then there should be a few other circles, it might be your knitting group or crafting group or fishing guides or whatever it is, there should be some outers, but there definitely should be at least one, if not maybe two, core people. I feel super, super blessed because I have a fairly decent core. They all have sort of unique things, like I might go to one person when I need, to talk through something, in a certain thing, maybe it is about, a guy or if it's parenting or whatever it is, there'll be different people that I go to in my core to navigate different things. But it's really important because they help keep me on track. And these people are not like just yes people. I know that they love me, but they will also tell me when I'm wrong. And that's so important because you're not going to grow in any way, shape, or form if someone just all the time is like, oh, yeah, that's awesome. I'm not awesome all the time. I am really awesome, but I'm not awesome all the time. And I need to be called on that, right? I need to get better every day. There are things that I do that are hurtful to other people, things that, I need to work on. And so they are helpful for those pieces that you can go to them and be like, hey, this incident occurred. This is what I'm thinking. This is my takeaway. Like, what do you think about that? Am I off base or not? So having those people that will hold you accountable is fundamental to like being a good human because you need people to kick you in the butt at times. But then there are also the people that, when you're heartbroken, when things don't go the way you wanted, when you're hurt, that you call and be like, oh my gosh, like I am falling apart right now. This happened and I'm gutted. And you can go to them or like Brene Brown, she's another one that I'm a big fan of. She was huge in her guilt and shame work and being able to call. And I have one girlfriend that I'll just go, I'm in a shame spiral right now. And she knows exactly what that means. And we can talk each other out of it, and it'll be like, where's that coming from? What's it telling you? And we can unpack it together to be able to get out of the spiral. So those community pieces have absolutely been fundamental to like who I am and where I am. And I think, my sister was such a fundamental piece to me because we related on some deep harm levels. And so then to lose her was like the most life devastating thing. I could have lost a different family member and I don't think it would have been as deeply scarring as it was losing her. because we were so bonded, through things. And so it was like the only light that I had like got extinguished. And so, and again, this is then going back to no one's coming to save you. You got to find your community, and at various stages of my life, there have been various peoples, and some have kind of been throughout, like my best friend Lindy, I've known her since grade 5. We met in grade 5. We really bonded in high school. And then as we were going through things and losing my sister and that kind of thing, she lost her brother to suicide. And so we've been through a lot of things together, and she has kind of stayed with me. I had to leave Cranbrook. She's still there, but I had to leave. But we've stayed in contact. But then there's been other people that have come in at different stages, in my early 20s or my, 30s, and going through different things in life that we've connected. And I may not necessarily sort of connect with them all the time anymore, but they were, really fundamental to the place where I was at that time, and the growth that needed to happen and where I was and the things I was trying to do. So community can be that long lasting thread like Lindy is, or it can be intersectional, but you've got to find those people, and it's a trial and error process. And sometimes it's very painful because you trust someone that didn't deserve your trust, and that's on them, not you. But then you got to know and be like, that's not my people, and go find your people. And then, like you say, I love that piece too, is like, who am I being a people for? Am I uplifting and helping other people as well? Because it can't just be a one-way relationship. It needs to be that giving back. And I know I went through my divorce first, and my bestie Nikki, she ended up getting divorced after. And so she walked me through mine. And then when she went through hers, it was horrible, but it was like, we could be there for each other, at those stages. So that was also like really helpful.
Mm, mm. Power of the sisterhood and beyond. I'm happy you have those that community for you.
Yes. Can I say one piece just to that thought is that I think both have been integral for me, like women and men, because the majority of the abuse, majority, not all, but the majority of the abuse that I have suffered has been from men. So those women and sisters that, are loving on each other, and we're lifting each other up, that's crucial. But it's also been just as crucial to have men in my life that are positive, that are healthy. I have two best friends that are men. One's married, one's not. But they speak into my life. My business partner, Chris, who I can call and walk through those things. And so to have those men, speaking into my life, uplifting me, very healthy, very platonic relationships, those have been incredible too. So I feel like, for me at least, it's been really good to have that balance. And I am like living proof that you can have platonic male relationships. I know there's people that don't think so, but it exists. And I'm so thankful for them in my life, because it's made me not swear off men. I'm like, because there are good ones out there, right? Like they exist. And so I really love that balance that I've been able to have with both genders in that sense.
But if we stay on the topic of men who may have harmed you or who did harm you, I understand that you have had the opportunity to confront at least one of the people who assaulted you. What was that experience like for you?
Yeah, I'm thankful for that experience. What I will say is, it's I don't know if I say dangerous, but be careful, if you want to have any kind of confrontational approach like that. Um, I did so in my early 20s. I did not know that it was a restorative justice process. At that time, I just knew that I had needs and that I wanted to talk to him. And so I reached out and initiated through another family member just to say, hey, will he talk to me? And so he and I agreed to meet. And that's really what restorative justice is all about. And it's why I'm super excited advocate of restorative justice, because I saw what that did for me. But he and I did it on our own, and there's a lot of really great organizations. There's actually resources in the back of my book for anyone that has been harmed and is looking to get engaged in a restorative process, because one of the fundamental things is like to not harm, whether it's the perpetrator or the victim. We want to be very careful. So these types of things need to be done in a very safe way, which doesn't really kind of translate to how I did it, because I just went to him and was like, hey, can we talk? And I've heard of similar situations that did not produce the outcomes that I got. And so I'm really, really thankful for my experience because I went and I had questions that I needed answers to, and I got those answers. I got very truthful answers, and I spoke to him, and he took full responsibility and full accountability for what happened, and that was huge. I didn't know that I needed that at the time, but I did. Once I got it, it changed things. So we currently have a relationship. We talk, and I'm thankful for him and who he is. I learned more about, him as a person, how these things came to be, and that was really, really important to know. So I believe that restorative justice is a better alternative, than incarceration. I think that it's important that people know about it because there's a lot of misconceptions, but it really brings the victim back into the center of the process versus just being sidelined. That person actually was incarcerated for what he did to me. And at the time, they just arrested him, and that was that. And it was done, except it wasn't done. We had a relationship prior to that, and it didn't end. And so where do you go? What do you do? And it was kind of like, okay, well, it's over now. She's not going to be harmed anymore, so we're all good. No, I wasn't all good. Again, like going back to the being left alone, like I needed help. I needed some way to process that. So, then fast forward years later, being able to speak to him about what happened, it was significant. And it's not always possible to do a process just like I did it, but that's again the beauty of restorative justice. It can be unique to the situation and the dynamics, the people involved. You can have surrogates step in for the victim or for the perpetrator. So there's all kinds of really great options for people. And, in my case, there was the ability to restore a relationship. However, that's not always the case, and that's okay. I did have a restorative justice meeting with Dean, the man who murdered my family. And there's no relationship there. I don't ever want a relationship there. I made that clear to him. He understood, like that was not an expectation. So the outcomes again can be different depending on the circumstances and the people that are involved, but it just depends on what the needs of the victim are, and that's what the most important thing is.
So I want to take just a moment to actually talk about the work you do, advocacy, but also speaking and restorative justice, and talk about why you were motivated to write your book and what you hope readers will get from it. So maybe talk a little bit about the concrete work and offering through the book you've made.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, it's called Becoming the Brave One, and it's really about stepping into who you were created to be in the first place. So, it's not about Amanda being the brave one. It's about all of us being brave in whatever context that looks like for us. What does it look like to be brave for you today? Um, and so, writing the book was actually like a 5-year process. So there were things that I, added to the book as I went along. Like it really developed. So it's a part of my healing journey. Like this, this is my healing journey. Want to come along? But as I read other people's books, whether it's a memoir or not, you know, you learn things from it and you implement them into your life and that kind of a thing. So it's my hope that as much as writing it was therapeutic for me, but also that people will find themselves in different places and maybe need to hear that you need to do your work, or you need to trust yourself, and that kind of a thing. So there's some concepts and principles that I learned that I hope will help other people too. Maybe it's something that they need to hear right at that time that they've picked up the book and learned from it. So it's been a long process, 5 years, a long time to then come to publishing date, but I'm terrified and excited all at the same time because it does kind of put everything out there. Like this is my life. So it's a big step, but I really just believe that it's going to make a difference because I do talk about the concepts of restorative justice, what that looked like in my life, how it can make a difference in our communities, because I've seen that, you know, our current system pits people against each other. And when we realize that we're all interconnected, we all are part of community, whether it's the largest community because we're together on earth,
Mm.
or whether it's within your own family circle, which is where a lot of harm happens. We're so afraid of the perpetrators from outside, but the majority of harm happens within our own homes.
Mm.
And so, what do we do with these broken relationships? And we've kind of not dealt with it well. We've either not talked about it, swept it under the rug, pretend it doesn't happen, which then typically perpetuates the cycle, you know, or we're taking extreme things, pulling people apart. Like there's all kinds of things that just is kind of reproducing the harm in a different way. It's not bringing healing. So the work that I do with incarcerated people now has been integral to my own healing from harm and learning about people's backgrounds. How do we get to why we're here, which really speaks to your whole piece of empathy, like empathy is everything because it changed me. As I encountered people that had committed great harm, including homicide, and learning about how they came to be, empathy doesn't mean no accountability. And I think that's often misunderstood. And so I think it's really important that we know that we still can hold people accountable and still have empathy. But it matters in how I treat people. And one of the things that I said to my former brother-in-law when I saw him is I said, I wanted to deal with my anger and my pain and my rage because carrying it and holding that was making me, dehumanize people. And that's how we got to where we lost my family because he had dehumanized us. We were objects that served his purpose. And at that point, we no longer served his purpose because he didn't want to be married. He didn't want to be a dad. He didn't want all these responsibilities. So it was an option to just end our lives. But that never should have been an option. We were not objects, we were people, and he lost that. And so I said to him, I know that there have been very harmful things that have happened to him in prison. And I said, I don't wish those things for you. And here's why, because I'm not you. And I don't want to be you. I want you to be treated like a human being because I want to be better than you. Like that was really what it came down to. I don't want to be in the type of place where I'm dehumanizing others, and at least not to that extensive level. I feel like there's certain ways that we kind of, do it maybe on micro levels. He took it to a macro level, and I'm like, okay, we've got to all be really cognizant and aware. And that's empathy is like this barrier from us doing that. It allows us to see the humanity in the other people. We want to be receivers of grace, but not so much givers of it, right? When someone harms me, I want them to hurt. I want them to pay. When I hurt someone, I want them to understand, why I did it and what my intention was. Okay, but you can't have both, like if you want to be understood and you want to be judged based on your intent and, have context matter, then we should be giving that to other people as well. So, yeah.
What a powerful case for empathy coming from somebody who can speak with moral authority on that. I'm so glad you're there. You're there. I'm so glad you're there. So I usually end our conversation. I have two questions. I have my final question and then I have a bonus. Can you think of a time in your life, Amanda, when you were on the receiving end of empathy and what that meant for you?
What I will say about, being on the receiving end of empathy, I think it's not one particular event. I think that it's a cumulative event and an ongoing event, because I've always felt, undeserving, right? Undeserving of love, of life. And so I always feel like I have to earn it. And so my standards are super high for myself, certainly for my children, which is not fair, and so I can work at a super high rate and capacity, but then that comes out and sometimes like really not being super nice, all the time. Um, and and I think it's just because like I'm going fast. It's not because I don't care or don't have empathy for others, but I go into like a perfunctionary mode because I've had to survive. Like this is how I've gotten through. And so I feel like I have received a lot of empathy, especially from those closest to me, because they've been on the receiving ends of that, whether it's my staff, like especially my head of core team, my kids, especially and number one, and then some of that core team I talked about earlier, like my friends and close people, because I'm just kind of going. And they've been so phenomenally understanding of like how I work as a person, and that doesn't always come across in a super lollipop sunflower kind of a way. And so I feel like the biggest empathy has been from them, just going, okay, like this is Amanda. But again, calling me out at times where it's like, okay, you were overly harsh there. And I love that. I needed it the most, especially from my kids. And I've always told my kids, like, I am so far from perfect and you need to call me out. And that process is really ugly for them, to call me out because I don't like to be called out. But then we work through it, and I'll be like, you were right. I was overly harsh in that moment, regardless of why. And you didn't deserve that. So yeah, the biggest thing is empathy from my kids. They've gone through a lot that they did not deserve because of the trauma that I've experienced, and not only just like living that out, but then this journey of trying to deal with it and trying to be better. So that's the biggest one, but I've seen it in that whole core circle surrounding me.
Mm. I asked that question. I never know what I'm going to hear. And so oftentimes, not often, always, those stories remind me how much empathy matters in our lives, and that we could all just turn up the dial of empathy, like turn up the volume of empathy in our lives, and never know how much of a difference it would make. Your story touched me because I realize the significance that self-compassion and self-empathy plays. That you, in your imperfections, may not always act with your team or your family in ways that you want. And I completely understand this idea of like executing, and that's not who you are at your core and your essence, but that's how your synaptic connections and your defense mechanisms helped you cope through life. And so that's sort of, you're on autopilot.
Yeah.
And to have self-compassion as a work in progress. That's something that I'm hearing, even though you didn't articulate it. So I want to say thank you for that.
No, it's true though. And when we're not compassionate with ourselves, we're not compassionate with others either. You know
Right.
what I mean? Like it's gonna come through and come out like that. So it's exactly it. It's, why have I been harsh with my kids? Because I'm being harsh with myself,
Hmm.
because it's stemming from me. So yeah, I think you've hit that right in the target right there.
I'm sure there's some people nodding out there in the audience listening, watching.
Feeling that,
Um,
yeah.
Last question, Amanda, if you'll indulge, and you can take a pass on this too. Can you share with us a little bit about your sister?
Oh yeah. No, I'll talk about her all day long and every day. She was a light. She was beautiful and amazing. And she definitely would call me out on things, but I knew that she still loved me regardless of whether she agreed with me or not. And so the little time that I got from her, she always wanted to be better. She was working on herself, and her journey. She was 8 years older than me. So, sort of a significant age gap there, which was, helpful to me because she was so much farther ahead in that sense than me. But she had a real determination to to work on herself. She knew there were things in her that she didn't like. And so she was, reading things, going to meetings, like doing all kinds of things that she could. And she lived in a townhouse. She was smoking. She hated that she smoked. She hated it. But it was one of her coping mechanisms that she still had up until she died. And so the one thing that we got out of it, though, is that her and I used to go and sit on the front stoop, especially after the kids were in bed. And we would sit and talk, and we would talk about, little things, or we would talk about super big, deep things. And she was definitely the person that I felt I could share the most and be open the most about, with anything in my life. And so, even though I didn't get to have her for as long as what I should have, what this world should have, just having that light for that time, I think it helped me to know that that was possible. Before her, like, I didn't know that was possible. You know, um, we weren't technically biologically related. And so her adopting me the way that she did and her being in my life when she did, yeah, it told me there's people that exist. You know, there's hope in the world, there's light in the world. Keep fighting for it, keep going, and not settle, like keep working, keep pushing. So because she always wanted me to be better, and I felt that, but not in a way that's like you're not good enough. It's like you are good enough, but keep going, She had that beautiful tension between those two things for me. And I knew she always wanted the best for me. So having that that was significant, that gave me hope for the rest of my life.
What was her name?
Her name was Susan Roberts when she passed. And yeah, she was a light to everybody in the whole community. People knew her. She loved Jesus with her whole heart and shared it, sometimes obnoxiously, but she just had a radical love, and such a giving heart, to adopt some little ragamuffin like me, into her heart and her home and her kids and everything, and take care of me when that was not her responsibility. It was not her job, but she saw me, she saw me. So if I could do anything, it would be to be like her and see other people.
What a beautiful way to end our conversation, Amanda. I want to thank everybody who's been watching and listening, and certainly we'll see you next week at Purposeful Empathy, but I want to end that she is so proud of you.
Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
have to tell myself that at various times, but it matters. Thank you.
Thanks for everything that you're doing. I wish you great success with your book, and all the information to get in touch with you, website, resources. We've talked about Brené Brown, Gabor Mate. You're in good company. Will be in the show notes. We'll see you next week at Purposeful Empathy.
If you know someone who would benefit from this episode, please share it with them now. Post the link to your socials, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button. The world needs more empathy, and you have an important role to play.